Hey everyone, so today I'm going to talk about staggered and global spaced repetition strategies in fast piano progress. And yeah, I kind of just came up with those names just now. I do talk about a staggered strategy sometimes. I think the global name makes sense as well, and it definitely is using spaced repetition principles I've talked about in other videos. Probably watching some of the other ones is a good idea in terms of like how the notation works, how spaced repetition works. I mean, but what it comes down to is that we're solving some kind of, and by solving I mean just playing to a very good quality, small things of some kind, something that's simple, moving on from them very rapidly, and then coming back and then increasing them to the next order of magnitude or the next order of complexity, moving on and then coming back. Easiest example is probably, one measure sets to two measure sets to four measure sets. And as always, a set is one measure plus the following note or the following chord in my methodology. So for instance, you do ones, you come back, you do twos, you come back, then you do fours, and you're using the way that the brain works to your advantage every time you forget and relearn. So since I've talked about some of the basic principles, I thought I would talk about kind of slightly higher order strategy. It's still not all inclusive of, how do we use the metronome? How do we use mental practice? How do we, what's the order that all these different methods come in? But it's kind of a broader application of the logical methodology. So, because once we have the basic principles, then part of the question becomes like, okay, well, how am I progressing from week to week, right? How am I setting goals from week to week? In the beginning, it's the easiest way to get started, as I may have mentioned, is figuring out what the student can do or figuring out what you can do and then doing a lot of that. So for instance, if all you can do is solve half measure or quarter measure sets, and that's all the evidence points to, like doing anything larger than that is going to take up a huge amount of time, then you'll just keep solving tons of whatever that is, right? And then the job of the teacher or of you, if you're your own teacher, would be to then figure out how to solve like one measure sets, right? You come back tomorrow or next week or something, you have all these good puzzle pieces from when you solved, let's say, half measure sets. You come back and now you have to know how to solve one measure sets or learn how to solve that. The reason we didn't do that from the beginning is because it was too difficult at that time. Your brain didn't absorb these little tiny sections yet. But by moving on, coming back, and having to relearn them again, things are entering your long-term memory enough that it's actually easier to expand them into larger sections. So then maybe now you're, I'm a bit congested because I was sick recently, but maybe now you're having a bit of trouble with the one measure sets. You need to improve your strategy. Maybe you're applying the adding and reverse principle. You're doing the separate than both idea. And once the ones are going, though, then you can solve all the one measure sets. Then when you come back the next time, then it becomes the issue of solving the two measure sets. But once you know how to solve a given type of problem, like, oh, now I know how to solve two measure sets, you can then carry that out throughout very large sections. And I don't think that this is the way that people typically think about practicing and piecing together coordinations. But it's the way that I think about it. It's like, oh, this person has the ability to solve sections of this size. So that means they can do that completely on their own. I'll teach them, though, how to solve like medium-sized sets, for instance. Sometimes people have the opposite issue. They actually are able to piece together large sections. It's just not very good. So that means either they have some kind of problem with assessment of quality. Like when they pass the sets, they're like, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good. It's actually not good. Or they have some kind of issue with solving very small sets. Like they actually need me to do the nitty gritty work, but then they're able to piece together the medium to large size ones. So everybody's different. Anyway, but very broadly speaking, now that we understand how space repetition is working, how small sets need to increase to larger ones each time that you come back. And now that I kind of talked through like, oh, actually each type of solve is its own thing. Like solving half measure sets is a skill. Solving one measure set, solving two measure sets, they're distinct skills. And they will broadly transfer between pieces in general, like your ability to solve very specific things and more general, larger things. But obviously there's going to be some differences. There's going to be unique challenges to each piece. So I think I'll show here, and this is like Mozart's most famous C major sonata. He actually has more than one. So let me see. I think what I'll say is, let's say, for instance, that we're talking about even half measure separate hand sets. So this would be very simple, because these would be the half measure set markers. So this would mean literally like just right hand from like there to there, right? Just two notes, very simple. From here to here, right hand from there to there, right? Or from here to here. So each one of these, like if we solve them, then we would just put like a half within my separate hand brackets, just the regular brackets. And then if we did left hand from here to here, or here to here, and so on, then we would draw a half right below to show left hand played from there to there, etc. Okay, so these would be like half measure. Actually, let me erase that. Half measure separate hand sets, like these markers. And so let's say that we continue doing these. Then later we came back, and then the next time we made them one measure separate hand sets, which means, of course, that we played like right hand from like there to there, and right hand from there to there, probably kept going, and so on. So I would then have a one here. I've covered this in other videos, but just for sake of example, same thing for left hand from there to there, left hand from there to there, then we keep going and going, right? So these would be like one measure separate hand sets. And then, as I may have mentioned, the next time through, we would actually do like half measure both hand sets. So that'd be indicated by these. This would mean both hands played from there to there. Won't go into like how to do this here for the scope of this video, but I mean, like there's better strategy in instead of just playing both hands from there to there. But anyway, but at least that's the result. So like both hands from there to there, there to there, and then we put them inside of these curly brackets, kind of like this, for both hands. And this would be like half measure both hand sets. And then the next time through, we would do one measure both hand sets, and so on. So let's actually, I'm going to go here for a second. And let's say that then we have one measure both hand sets. Obviously, then we can have like two measure both hand sets, four measure both hand sets, and so on. Let's say that we have one more. Oh, the arrow did something a little weird. 8 measure both hand sets. So that's probably enough for this example. And let's actually make it like some of these pretty colors of the rainbow. So we got like red. Actually, maybe that'll be... Yeah, might as well. So we'll do like an orange, yellow, green. This will make sense in a moment. Blue. I guess I won't try to understand indigo. I'll just have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, and then last one we'll do maybe this pinkish. That's too similar. I guess we'll do this This color. Okay. So basically, like, as we go through these like 7 times, each time we'll probably go into like the following color, right? So we'll start with, let's say, these like, maybe I can make this larger. We would start with half measure separate hand sets in the beginning, no matter what. So we would go through, let's say that we do that for quite a while, right? So normally we would literally write it within the square brackets, but this will at least visually let you see kind of what's happening on a kind of a higher order. So what was I going to say? Or in terms of higher order strategy, let's say. So if we use the staggered strategy, it would go something like this. So we've got red in the beginning. Maybe let's say we keep going. So we actually do like half measure separate hand sets for some time. And then we actually go back and then we do, then we would do one measure separate hand sets, right? Like in the little key here. This is just completely random sections. Don't take this too seriously. Then we'll do more red over here. Right? So then, and then the third time that we come back, we would take those one measure separate hand sets and turn them into half measure both hand sets. So then now we would combine, because now we know these separate hand sets well enough that we should be able to solve half measure both hand sets the following time. So that's good. We take these existing half measure separate hand sets, and because we've allowed some spacing to go by, now we can try to now we can try to make them into one measure separate hand sets. And we could do that the same here, I guess. And then we would just go on into the next part, start to plant more seeds in terms of half measure both hand sets, and so on, right? The following time, then we would increase these into one measure both hand sets. So this is what I mean by a staggered strategy. And maybe I use this as too large of a section for an example, but you get the point. So we're always like kind of bringing things to the next stage, to the next level of solidity, and at the same time, we're always planting new seeds. Now, what actually happens as this goes on, in retrospect, maybe I could have used smaller sections, but basically there will be like more, then they'll start to be blue, they'll start to be purple, they'll start to be light blue and everything here, right? So let's kind of skip ahead for sake of time so I don't have to use like every single color and say like, oh, we actually ended up with like we ended up with like an 8 measure, both hand set over here. Maybe I should use this. It's more accurate. Okay. So we ended up with an 8 measure both hand set, which means we can play both hands probably from memory all the way from the beginning. But in the meantime, we've planted like all these other seeds here throughout, right? So maybe like we had some like blue here, we have some green. So even though this took some time to put together, let's say that this took like, a month for a beginner, even a total beginner, to put together, or a month and a half. But then when they start the next part, they've already been working on it for like 5 weeks or 4 weeks, right? And this would be probably like blue in this example, for instance. So they could piece that together the following week. And then in the meantime, they're advancing the orange to yellow, they're advancing the yellow to green, etc. And then in 2 weeks from now, they could then, they could solve the next section almost immediately because they were working on that one for 4 or 5 weeks. So basically what happens is every week along traditional mindset, usually you will bring to the teacher or you'll have for yourself like a new section, right? But instead of starting the next one from scratch and it also taking like 4 to 6 weeks, you've already been working on the next part for like 5 weeks. So then it'll just get done immediately. And then the next week after, that one you'll have been working on for like 4 weeks. And then by the time you get to the next week, you'll have been working on it for 5 weeks. So that will come to fruition as well. Essentially, you're reaping the rewards of long-term investment every single week, right? Because at any given point, you have a section you've worked on for 6 weeks, the next part you've worked on for 5, next one for 4, next one for 3, next one for 2, etc. As long as you can keep things going and your strategy is good, then every week you'll not only be able to add a large new section to the beginning, you'll have planted seeds to set yourself up for success in subsequent weeks. Every week there should be another piece, another large piece that comes to fruition as a result. So this is staggered strategy. I think it's best for most students as well too, because at least you are increasing the large section in the beginning that you can play from memory. So you're getting all the benefits of, or it could be not from memory, I suppose, but you're getting all the benefits of traditional lessons where you're just, you're getting more and more from the beginning as your progress continues. But you're also reaping the rewards of, my unique approach with spaced repetition and all the principles I've talked about, because you're constantly planting seeds. And you're not, if it takes 6 weeks to put the first section together, it doesn't actually take 6 weeks to put the next section together. It only takes another week because you'd already started working on it 5 weeks ago, right? So anyway, I think you get the point of that. The global strategy is really just, it's very simple. It's essentially this. Let me see if I can show you. Yeah, maybe this isn't going to require a great deal of explanation, but actually I think that the visual is going to help. So the global strategy, you maybe guessed it, but it's basically this. Half measure separate. This will seem probably insane, but this is essentially what I do. Although I'll write the fingering for the entire piece first. You might be like, what is he even doing? But this is, I wrote these are half measure separate hand sets in the example. I don't actually recommend that a student does this. But essentially I'm doing whatever is simple for the entire piece. I probably do it through this entire sonata, to be honest, all 3 movements. And then once I've done it with all the red, then once I got all the way through to the end of the first movement or whatever it may be, then I'll go all the way back to the beginning and then I'll just do 1 measure separate hand sets through the entire piece. Seriously. And the reason I do this, thinking, how is that better than the first strategy? Memory consolidates during sleep, and so if you can cover sections quickly enough, and you have the motivation, you have the drive to do it, basically you'll have more sections that go through memory consolidation during sleep, right? If I can get through the entire movement, everything's going to be going through that spaced repetition, forgetting and re-remembering process earlier, including the measures that are near the end of the piece. The downside is that I won't be able to, let's see, I guess that thought escapes me. Maybe it'll come back to me, or maybe I'll talk about it in a future video. No, the downside is that you just won't have a larger section from the beginning as early. So for students, if you have a lesson each week, or if you just want to have something more substantial to play for yourself or for others earlier, you won't get the reward as early. But if you do this correctly, basically after a few weeks, you should have a huge reward where everything comes together, the whole movement comes together. Problem for students or self-learners is that your strategy may not be so good. So this could backfire. You could be planting seeds the whole time and through the whole piece, and then just it doesn't come to fruition because your assessment of quality isn't that good or the strategy isn't that good. So that's when it might be helpful to have some guidance. But I think the staggered strategy is usually more inherently motivating for most people. I have had a number of situations recently with more advanced students that are starting to get into more of the global strategy. and it's really working well for them. So yeah, so I hope you found some of these ideas helpful. If so, please like, subscribe, maybe leave a comment, and looking forward to next week as always.